This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. How's everybody doing today? Happy Friday. Yeah, it is Friday, and we have a bonus episode for you all. And before we get to it, let's talk a little silver and gold, shall we? If you're looking at precious metals, look no further than Silver Gold Bull. When it comes to precious metals, look down in the show notes. You can click on the link or text Grahame. He'll give you all the answers to all your questions you may have around buying, selling, storing, or using your retirement accounts to invest in precious metals. Just head to down in the show notes or go to silvergoldbull.ca.com and make sure on any purchases you reference the Sean Newman Podcast. Bow Valley Credit Union. Buying and selling Bitcoin has never been easier. They have developed the first in Canada Bitcoin gateway. With just a few clicks, you can buy Bitcoin directly from your Bow Valley Credit Union account. Your Bitcoin gateway account is linked to your traditional BVCU bank account, enabling seamless on-ramps, off-ramps between fiat and Bitcoin. Little tech expertise or knowledge of blockchain required. Visit bowvalleycu.com for more information. Profit River. When it comes to all your firearms needs, head to profitriver.com. They got a website, obviously, and you can order right off of there. They ship Canada-wide, or you can stop in if you're in the Lloydminster area. Stop into their showroom and take a little, first-hand peek at what they have cooking in there. On any purchases, make sure you use coupon code SMP. It gets you into monthly draws. Profit River, they are the major retailers of firearms, optics, and accessories, and they serve all of Canada. The Mashspiel, January 17th in Kalmar, Alberta, just west of Leduc. 12 teams left available. And so if you're, you can be a single or you can put in a team of 4. Either way, don't worry if you're not a giant curler. This is a Mashspiel, a mashup community event. I mean, it's going to be pretty light. It's about trying to get all of you wonderful people together, have a little bit of fun. You can also be a company and donate prizes. We've got, Garden Girl out of Regina has donated some prizes. The Sheep Loft here in Lloyd has donated some prizes as well. So that's pretty cool. If you're wanting to donate, you can do that. Reach out to me, or you can go down the show notes and click on the link to get a team or yourself into it. Cornerstone Forum returns March 28th at the Westin Calgary Airport in, obviously, Calgary, Alberta. Tom Luongo, Alex Kreiner, Vince Lanchi, Matt Ehret, Chad Prather, Karen Katowski, Tom Bodrovics, 222 minutes are all going to be in attendance. More to come. Looking forward to unveiling the entire guest list as we confirm going along. The 2 newest, Chad Prather, who was on a few weeks ago, and then Karen Katowski just last week. So that will be the next 2 in line to be in person there. You can get your early bird tickets right now at showpass.com/Cornerstone26. That's also down in the show notes. Substack's free to subscribe to. If you're wanting to pay attention to what's going on every week in the podcast world, take a look there and you can get up to speed. You can also become a paid member and support what I do here on the SMP. We have the new studio coming here awfully soon, awfully quick. In-floor heat now going, which means it's time to get everything set up. If you're wanting to get on that value for value wall, here is the growing list. I'm like, do I read this all off? I guess I'm going to. So here are some of the people who've donated. Eileen Clark, am I saying this right? Dickow Insurance Investment? I hope so. Derek Hansen, Tyke Construction, John Mitchell, Jason Erie, Linda Perry, Hillary Clare, Derek Homedall, Gabriel Trotzek, Steve Usselman, Deborah Martin, Curtis Morgan Clark, Rio Noble, Torrin Moorbrother, Leighton Gray, Grayson Stridehorst, Cameron Carter, Blake and Melanie Usselman, Valley Floors, Lucy and Mila Remersma. I'm terrible with these names, folks. Dave Amiet, Chuck Brodnick, Dean Amandrud, Brian Hayden, Dale Paul, Rhett and Jen Fountain, Troy Clark, Mark Labacane, Badlands Coffee Company, Jonas Hagel, Robbie Cashel, Ken and Jen Rutherford, Theo, Joe, Ben Rutherford, Mason, Harley, Ayla, Casey, Mila, Shay, Mel Newman, Stephen Elaine Newman, Jim Henderson, Cam Grabowski, Jamie Sinclair, Warawa, Robert Villeneuve, Dallas Zimmer, Scott Petrie, Ben Trudeau, Scott and Alana Roatan, Nancy Fleming, Donald Valiant, Grant Milner, Kathleen Davis, Kirby Cohen, Louis Stang, Kevin Damon, Tom Arkard, Danray Paving, McGowan Chartered Accountant, Crude Master, Guardian Plumbing and Heating, Harris Electric, Noble Floor Covering, Renegade Acres, T-Bar One Trucking, Genix. Oh my goodness, I'm sure I've missed somebody, and I will make sure the final list has your name on it. If your name is not on that list, and a shout out to all those wonderful people and companies, shoot me a text. Would love to add you to the ever-growing list of dissidents, I guess. We joked about that a few weeks ago. But appreciate your support on this build, and look forward to getting that wall finalized and up. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. Make sure to share with a friend. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. Today's guest is a Canadian investigative journalist and best-selling author. I'm talking about Sam Cooper. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Sam Cooper. Sam, thanks for hopping on.
It's great to be back with you.
Yeah, it's been a few probably months, folks. Sam, you are, I think, a guy that most people follow along with some of your news coverage, your breaking stories, different things like that. You recently testified in Ottawa. Maybe you could just start there. We could walk through some of that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like I feel quite rewarded that, after leaving corporate media and starting the Bureau over 2 years ago, I'm up to over 30,000 subscribers now, and I'm being asked to testify based on my reporting at the Bureau in Parliament, which is indicating to me that there's a growing recognition that independent media is important in North America and Canada, especially. So I was asked to come and testify on Canada's ethics regime. We have an ethics commissioner. It's been widely reported that Pierre Poilievre slammed the RCMP for being unable to potentially prosecute Justin Trudeau on obstruction of justice charges related to SMP Lavalin. Look, I've reported on various critics and my own digging into that case, which I can tell you about. I've reported on, similar cases related to Chinese election interference, where I believe the Trudeau government, in a different way, similarly failed on, let's just say Canada's ability to investigate itself or pay attention to deeply concerning intelligence about hostile states getting into our parliament. So essentially, I told the members of the ethics committee, let me break it down this way. They were interested in my reporting prior to the federal election. I looked into how Prime Minister Mark Carney and his role with Brookfield, and I know we talked before about TD Bank and its board, and how someone very important to Mark Carney, Frank McKenna, sits on the TD board. And why I think we discussed why maybe that could have a little influence potentially on why TD wouldn't crack down on the money laundering that the US government had to jump in and prosecute. So I could ramble through many different cases, but the MPs such as Michael Cooper from your home province were interested in my reporting on Carney and Brookfield. Carney, as the business person before running for prime minister, had Brookfield had deep dealings with Chinese Communist Party state regulated or even direct Chinese Communist Party state entities in green business worldwide, and especially real estate in China. And I told the members on my reporting that, look, you don't get access to China's real estate development market unless Beijing at the highest levels wants you to. And that is how basically my testimony covered getting access to those markets should raise potential ethical concerns to the decisions Mark Carney's making in Ottawa with regards to, it came up in the hearing, he has about 100 potential business vulnerabilities regarding his global holdings, his global business with Brookfield, which I said was deeply involved with China. And so the key question that the members were after was, does Canada's ethics commissioner, are they in any way independent? And I argue, like others, no, they're politically appointed. They serve at the pleasure of the prime minister and his cabinet. And I just think that case after case of horror story that's risen in Ottawa, SNC-Lavalin being the key recent one. It's not even recent anymore, but it should be. It should be current. The key. This is the evidence that there's no real teeth to the commissioner and the structure around looking into whether our prime minister, let's talk about the current one, is doing the business and the bidding of Canadian voters, or could he secretly be, due to a very weak and gap-filled ethical screen, be making decisions that will benefit his friends, whether they be in the United States, China, Montreal, Brookfield, Canada Power Corporation, Canada China Business Council. There's just all kinds of first order, second order, third order, fourth order, complex ways that he could benefit his friends. And so at the end of the day, my testimony went further, and I said, we need an anti-corruption independent commission to replace the RCMP on politically sensitive files. Because again, I said it very carefully in my testimony. I'll be a little bit more forward with you, Sean. I strongly believe, and I know the RCMP cannot investigate senior Canadian politicians for potential ethical or corruption breaches connecting to foreign powers or foreign companies or any manner of outside interests.
They cannot?
I say they can't. And, look, the SNC-Lavalin case, I had reported on that. This didn't come up in my testimony, but Jody Wilson-Raybould, documents came out through an entity called Democracy Watch, which used, access to information, and got something like volumes of records showing that the RCMP's review, they didn't even call it an investigation, of Justin Trudeau's role in the SNC-Lavalin case. Redacted documents came out showing that the RCMP was told by Wilson-Raybould and others that senior political aides, surrounding Trudeau and his office, said that the SNC-Lavalin case was connected to the Liberals' re-election chances. As you know, Wilson-Raybould, secretly tape recorded various people saying that Justin Trudeau's Privy Council clerk, Michael Wernick, conveyed that the Prime Minister wanted a deferred prosecution to happen with SNC-Lavalin. The Prime Minister even referred to his own riding Papineau being important to the SNC-Lavalin case. And in a nutshell, what these new documents disclosed was Wilson-Raybould told the RCMP, you need to interview many more people. You should seek a waiver to extend your review of the SNC affair. And you could look at, this is a quote, she told them, you could look at the criminal obstruction charge regime in the criminal code. Redaction after that statement, but that's suggesting that Wilson-Raybould, who, remember, is bound, of course, by certain cabinet secrecy, rules, was telling the RCMP, strongly hinting she thinks there's a case there of criminal obstruction. And as we know, the RCMP didn't go forward. That's just one example. I've got, more related to Chinese election interference. Look, Sean, I even posted to X when I'll end my answer here. The current public safety minister, as you know, has been standing up self-righteously in Ottawa. And as I say, with fake pearl-clutching rhetoric, indicating the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, how dare you criticize the RCMP for not being able to investigate? We trust our men and women on the front line protecting Canada. And I just say that's fake news, because look, I listened to Gary's clip on X, and I did a little post and said, look, people, 100,000 followers, I have emailed the RCMP with direct evidence of a charged Chinese alleged drug trafficker who my information indicated had an official connection to an elected official, and I'm not going to say more than that, in Canada. I forwarded this information, as well as anonymous source information, going further into the election interference realm, and asked the RCMP, would they investigate? Can they comment? And they haven't done anything. So, Sean, I kind of I parcel out bit by bit some of the explosive stuff I know, because as you know, I'm subject of various lawsuits due to my reporting on election interference. I and others see this as something called lawfare. So I'm being careful, but the facts are the facts. There is or was an elected official with a direct link to a charged Chinese drug trafficker, and the RCMP hasn't done diddly squat about it. So, I mean, take what you will from that.
Yeah, well, as I've come to know through having interviews with you, you've got some fiery stuff. And does it shock me they do nothing with it in this current Canadian climate? Not so much. You know, like the ethics violations themselves from our politicians, well, they just keep stacking up. Do you find it interesting then, or maybe not interesting? I'm curious your thoughts, because the House of Commons, here, I'll read it off. Motion passed. Brookfield execs and Liberal government officials, they have to disclose. Or I should say the House of Commons just voted to launch an investigation into Mark Carney's stock holdings. It was a Conservative motion passed with the support of all parties except the Liberals. And basically it's time to see what Carney's been trying to hide. Do you think anything will come of that?
Yeah, I've got two answers to that. I mean, my first answer is these committees and these hearings are 95 to 98% political theater.
Yes.
I think any astute watchers know. Does anything really ever come out in terms of accountability, you know, with regards to all the procurement scandals? As you know, the Conservatives are seeking a payback of those scandalous contracts related to one of the, I can't even count anymore, the horror stories that have come out of Eastern Canada. And, you know, whether it's the ArriveCan app or, I don't know, COVID screening for another entity that I looked at. I mean, it gets bad, but, you know, the Conservatives have asked, where's the payback on that one? Nothing has happened yet. So this gets back to my first answer. There's no teeth to, you know, the ethical regime or the regulatory regimes that come out of these committees. What they do, and this is my same answer for the Hogue Commission into election interference, which is another piece of political theater and whitewashing, but it produced a lot of documentation, speaking about Hogue, you know, around China's deep infiltration tactics in Canada. And I say the same case is now exploding in the British Parliament and revealing even more, because Britain, let me just say this, Britain, where they don't have a captured media, you know, they've got a strong media that is taking leaks and holding the government to account. And the media is not being, you know, accused of like colluding with criminal national intelligence leakers. The media is leading the charge for democracy in the UK. Whereas here in Canada, you know, we got one or two reporters like myself that do what we do and do it for Canadians, do it because we love the country and democracy. I still love Canada. I don't want it to separate and break up. I'm fighting till the end. Okay. But look, I mean, I rambled a bit there, but there's so much going on in Ottawa that's those committees. My short answer is they give more to the public. There's more clips circulating on X. There's more discussions like the one between you and I, and that can inform voters. Will it inform people that want to separate from Alberta? Well, if the case is righteous, it should. I'm not the judge of that. So that's the value. There's no regulatory value in it.
Yeah, well, you're right. Like, do we expect anything to come out of the ethics commissioner that's all of a sudden going to see some politicians behind bars or whatever the case may be? No, we're learning that here quite. I don't know, not reluctantly, because it just continues to happen, right? It's like, oh, another ethics violation, and what happens with that? Nothing, you know.
Nothing happens. So this is why I say all it can really do at this point is inform the voters. That is, if we still believe that the federal election can't be psyoped and gerrymandered so that we've got a one-party state, which appears to be the situation now. But to dig a little deeper into Brookfield, look, I do think it's positive that the House Parliament will be looking at these 103 potential vulnerabilities of Mark Carney. Whether, you know, the media in Ottawa, you know, wants to dig in and something comes out.
We won't hold our breath.
We'll hold our breath, but look, I'm a strong believer, and I put my money where my mouth is, that independent media, independent podcasters, people can judge them, you know, for their talents in gathering information, making assessments, putting out opinions. And I'm saying we're adding to democracy by doing this, and this
100%.
hearing will help that. which raises, maybe I should leave this alone, but another part of my committee hearing this past week, there were certain MPs that said, we really appreciate journalism, and rambled on for 5 minutes, and then the sting comes. But what should we do to better protect Canada's information ecosystem so that investigative reporters that use anonymous sources don't undermine confidence in government? And I'm like, I didn't say this, but you have the temerity to put it that way. I'm here as an independent journalist with a background to tell you stuff that you're not going to hear in, Power and Politics and CBC for very specific reasons. So if you want to bill C-18 me out of existence or something like that, go ahead, because I'm now based in Wyoming, although I didn't put it that way. I'm registered in the United States, so I can report on North America. But it was a little bit funny to me how this came up.
If you don't mind, I don't know if I knew that. Maybe I glazed over that. You're based out of Wyoming now.
Well, physically, I'm very much still in Canada, but I'll give you this little scoop, if it's even a scoop or if it even matters. To me, it does. I registered the Bureau in Wyoming, and I've taken, steps to, one of them is because the United States government, supports a greater freedom of the press. And as you know, I'm reporting not just on Canada, I'm reporting on the United Kingdom, I'm reporting on Washington, Australia, New Zealand. I'm now looking worldwide in my reporting. And so I just think I wouldn't say it's the same issue confronting small business owners that, I heard Lisa Rayett, the former MP, say on CBC that she's hearing so many people for business reasons looking at the States. That's not my consideration. My consideration is freedom of the press.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one, right? Like, I know sitting here in Alberta, talking to Albertans, people across Canada, people in the States, across the seas, like, we're seeing with all the different bills being pushed, there's a lot of independent media that are staring at that and going, holy crap, if this goes through, like, we won't be able to do what we're doing. Like, full stop. They will come after us one by one or all at the same time or however they want to do it. And the ramifications of that are fines, jail time, like just removal, full stop.
vanishing from the internet. But look, I mean, Sean, I steadfastly try to, for years, ignore this very type of conversation and bill, but, because my focus is in other areas. But absolutely, like, these are real issues and concerns. Like, look at what's happening in Britain. And by the way, there's things going on. There's statements being made that I would never make and I wouldn't support. But people are getting, like, the local constabulary knocking on their door for mean posts.
The last figure I saw, and I know it's gone up since this time, but it was 12,000 people in the UK had been arrested for posting online. And you're like, for posting online, folks, posting. It's
a real concern. And not to get off topic, but the real issue there, and it's come up, is, look, Keir Starmer's government, Keir Starmer as a lawyer was very, as other British politicians are, is very close to the Middle Eastern community, in representation. And so there's just become this absolute collision of society in Britain where something that's called the rape grooming scandal related to how in other cultures, unfortunately, young women are groomed and targeted. And that was basically covered up by the British government. And so the result is you had British people, many of them making what I would see as gross and unacceptable overgeneralizations and statements, at the same time responding, emotionally and security-wise to their family being endangered because the government's covered something up, and some of them have been jailed. So I don't know exactly where I come down, but where they've come down in Britain against free speech is obviously the wrong position, and it does endanger independent journalists.
Well, I mean, I don't know all the posts. I don't sit here and go through them all, but just off of what you said there, right? You cover something up that is horrific, right? Yeah. I don't think anyone in society thinks a rape gang is something that should be tolerated at all.
Nope.
You cover it up. What is going to be the response of everyday people? They're going to be upset, rightfully so. And if you don't address it, which by sounds of it, they did not, that's even worse. They swept it under the rug. Then you're going to get people who are going to say and do things to try and stir the population to address it, right? I mean, and now the government's come down harder and said, no, you're going to be arrested for online posting. You're going to do, I mean, like, to me, it's they're creating their own mess.
Yeah, it's a horrible way to administer a society. And, our multicultural societies are brilliant. This is the the ground roots of a great nation. But if Western governments don't recognize that other cultures may need training to avoid, what's not addressed, where they come from, other cultures, that haven't got deep roots in our Western, justice system cannot impose, their religion-based laws or standards in the West, or it doesn't work. And governments, too many governments, especially in Canada, have just come down have led a system of other cultures and justice systems embed in our societies, and it's causing a tear that I don't think I could have envisioned when I was in school 30 years ago, being told about how Pierre Trudeau envisioned a utopia tossed salad of societies, and the melting pot in the United States was not as good. So I just think again, I'm not trying to.
I like that utopian tossed salad. Yeah,
they literally said that in our civics classes. We're a tossed salad of cultures. The United States melts the people together into an American people, and I think we were taught that the tossed salad is the better way. I just find myself a lot more, I'd say, over the past 2 years, realizing the ideology of Pierre Trudeau has just, and I don't have to tell this to listeners from Alberta. They'll say, shut up, we know this. But as an Easterner, I've just recognized how dominant that ideology of Trudeau was and how dated it is to the real modern world. And I just think that's one of the things holding Canada back, if Canada can push through this tough point.
Speaking on the UK, because I'd obviously you've been posting about it. Others have been posting about it too. But I don't know. Is it the Mandarins of Whitehall or this scandal there? Can you walk me through this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why I started the Bureau, so I can use what I learned in 20 years in Canada with regards to how Canada is extremely weak to foreign networks, organized crime, etc. So, okay, I'll start with the scandal. 2 years ago, explosive news, the Conservative government of the United Kingdom put forward, or under them, a prosecution was advanced saying that 2 young British guys were involved in a Chinese interference case inside their parliament and inside their government, Westminster. And so we didn't know anything for 2 years. Then a month ago, shocking news comes out that the prosecution makes a terse statement. We cannot advance this case. So it's like, WTF, why? And so obviously, again, the British media wasn't going to accept that. And so over the past few weeks, information which has to come from the top of Britain's counterintelligence, MI5, and national security structure has leaked out that, in a nutshell, the new Labour government taking over from the Conservative government of Keir Starmer and its senior advisors reportedly have caused the collapse of this massive, the biggest espionage case in a generation in Britain. Decades ago, it was Russia and spies in Cambridge and Oxford. Now it's inside Parliament, it's China. And the case allegedly was dropped for financial reasons, to keep, as is the old story, to keep high-level trade going between Beijing and the United Kingdom. It looks like very pro-Beijing business, influential people at the top of Starmer's government caused evidence not to be forwarded to prosecution so it could advance its case. I'll leave it there, but why it struck me is the nut of the alleged scheme is Xi Jinping, president of China, basically his right-hand man, maybe second or third most powerful person in China, a guy named Kai Qi's spy master, was allegedly running this young British teacher who's teaching in a Mandarin school in China to collect information from the man's colleague in Parliament who was working for Conservative MPs. These Conservative MPs were very critical and concerned about China. So, of course, they were working on laws to combat, what China is doing around the world. And they were, funneling real-time, politically sensitive intelligence back to Beijing on these Conservative MPs. And what emerged is so China's secret police could use that information and, in a nutshell, target the people they're worried about in the UK Parliament. So there's so many other angles and tentacles of this story breaking every day in London. But and some of them document-based, I've reported on, but I'm saying this is the exact same story that I broke, where Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government ignored, in another sort of way, enforcement and intelligence information being brought up to Justin Trudeau saying, hey, China is deeply attacking your opponents, the Conservatives, who are a little bit harder on China, and they're mostly supporting you and your Liberal MPs and others in your networks, Justin Trudeau. And he basically, as I reported, the information that came out in the Hogue raised concerns that he, ignored this information. There was just as one more example that brings it a little closer to the UK example, there was a national security warrant targeting a Canadian politically connected person, is all I can say, for legal reasons, very close to Trudeau, very close to the Liberal government. That warrant was targeting that person. And as came out in the Hogue Commission, the question was, did Bill Blair, Trudeau's public safety minister, and his staff attempt to delay or even obstruct that warrant? Major scandalous information. Of course, Madam Hogue, I say, came back with weak or nil findings on that issue. But to me, that's where you have a legal structured investigation, certainly impeded for at least 4 months in Canada, into one of Justin Trudeau's friends, allegedly very close to China. And it's the same sort of story in the UK. So in a nutshell, that's how they tie it together.
It's very, very mirror image.
It's like a mirror. It's a doppelganger. And this is what I say, at this point, without being falsely modest, as a journalist, I'm an international expert on how China's United Front networks, that is the Chinese Communist Party, is implanted into our democracies. And, the Anglo-American, supposedly Canadian, it used to be, Western Intelligence Alliance is attacked and divided by these United Front structures. That reminds me, in the UK case, powerful US lawmakers wrote a letter to the British ambassador saying, we have deep concerns that your government, Keir Starmer, has dropped this UK spy case. There appears to be very strong evidence. Did you drop it because you're in trade talks with China? Did you drop it because they want to build China wants to build what's called a mega embassy in London? And, there are obviously concerns with intelligence around this. All these sensitive things going on. And the US lawmakers in a letter said, we're concerned that this could disrupt the Five Eyes Alliance. We're concerned, did China present pressure on your prosecution and your government? And furthermore, they said, the U.S. House Committee on the CCP, shared information with the lawmakers that China allegedly targeted. So you tell us, is our information in Washington safe? And that's an official demand to Britain. So that just shows you how deep the concerns go in Washington.
I don't know when. Was it the first time, second time I had you on? I remember having you and Cohotas on, and we were talking about Canada-U.S. relations, and I was, I don't know, was I optimistic? I don't even know if I can say that. I was just watching it going like, is this going to get better or worse?
Yeah.
And where we sit today, I think we can all agree it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse. Yeah, yeah.
But when we were talking about fentanyl, and they came out saying there's no fentanyl crossing the border from Canada to the U.S. It's all coming from Mexico. Since then, you probably know the number of labs that have been busted here in Canada. We've seen, down in Australia and New Zealand, different chemicals and drugs being shipped as what was it, syrup, and what was the other one?
Liquid, pure liquid meth,
Yes.
from a fake Canadian beer sort of shipment, killed a young New Zealander. He drank a fake Canadian beer. And yeah, I and others have, mostly myself, have led the way in showing, and we talked about it. I said Canada is being used as a hub of China's transnational fentanyl, meth, etc., synthetic networks, because Canada has the ports, the institutions, G7 nation. I said United States sees Canada as a vulnerability with regards to Chinese infiltration. That was our previous discussion. And I remember some of the same, failed political hacks in Ottawa saying, "Oh, what BS, etc." No, it's the exact. I was understating what I actually know, right? And so that's the issues. Yeah, both you and I wanted to give, I would say, in fairness, we were like, okay, we're not going to judge Mark Carney yet. I have my concerns that he has his ties to China in business, but let's see what he does. Everyone agrees he's a smart person. And you're right. It's like it's dropped off a ski slope. It's even worse than Justin Trudeau could have done at this point.
Well, now you, I don't know. I'm looking at this U.S. Trump Carney relationship. Then Doug Ford comes out with the video, and that blows up, and then Trump's upset, and we're just watching this, and I'm going, where does it go from here? From your standpoint, Sam, like, obviously you don't have a crystal ball. You can't see the future. But Canada-U.S. relations are getting worse by the day, maybe by the hour.
They're getting worse. It's extremely concerning and troubling to me because, as I said, I'll fight till Canada to near the end. I'm not going down with the ship, but to the extent that I, as a journalist, can help people understand, help voters understand. Yeah, I absolutely believe. I mean, a Pierre Poilievre government would have been a better negotiator, would have gotten us a better deal by now, quite likely, and would be a better security partner with the United States, which is where this ultimately has to go for Canada to survive. But Doug Ford's ad, David Eby's shenanigans, none of it makes sense unless, they're trying to almost throw a wrench in Canada doing a deal. And I don't know if I want to put all the blame on Canada, because you and I both know that, as he says himself, President Donald Trump can play hardball and can play dirty too. So are they, is President Trump and his team in Washington, in Treasury or whatever, kind of using the pinchers to say, yeah, we'll do a deal with Canada, but we want a little bit more oil from Alberta. We want some more critical minerals from the Ring of Fire in Ontario, where Doug Ford sits. We don't want David Eby to send shipping deals to Chinese civil military fusion. So we're going to very carefully and aggressively negotiate to make sure we protect the homeland of the United States. We get a better deal for our industries, because if it goes to war with China, we need a bigger industrial hub in the United States, so that whether you're building Jeeps in Ohio or you have to retool the factory to make, Abrams tanks, the United States can compete with China. So I don't want to ramble, but I think all these complexities are going on. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump and his team are playing purely fair. They're doing their best to protect their homeland because they see the threat from China. And where's it going from here? When I see Doug Ford doing that ad and David Eby doubling down on that ad, by the way, the ad, as others have noted, the Ronald Reagan tape, China used it months ago. So where does Doug Ford and his team around him get the idea to do that? Is there anything more sophisticated going on there? I don't know, but these are fair questions in my mind as to what tentacles and levers does China have in whatever Canada is doing? Because I'm certain that China has an interest in the negotiations between Canada and the United States. We already saw that in the election when it was revealed, through this election monitor that popped out as a result of my prior work, we could at least learn during the election that China at the highest level was pumping propaganda into, Canada's election, let's just call them social media channels, saying that Mark Carney will be a strong fighter against President Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. And so I say the Liberal campaign of Mark Carney closely mirrored what was coming out of Chinese propaganda. Elbows up. Mark Carney is a champion of Canada. Pierre Poilievre is like a tool or an errand boy of Donald Trump. I say, if you ask me where it's going, I say, let's look where the puck has already been. China interfered in our election. They wanted Carney. The only mystery here is, why was Donald Trump, when he knew the 51st rhetoric was not helping the Conservative Party, the Liberals very clearly, along with China, were using that. Why did Trump keep doing it? That's the mystery in my head still. Has he got an even deeper play going on? I don't know.
It is an interesting question.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know.
Because he would have known that you can think all you want about Donald Trump, good or bad. But they would have known that rhetoric at that time in our election wasn't helping the Conservatives at all.
No. Yeah, no, it was part of the psyop. I say Carney and China are most to blame for the psyop of Canadians foolishly picking him when we should have had a fresh new government, a reset. But absolutely, the Trump psyop contributed to an election we've never seen in our lifetime.
Well, it gave him an enemy. It gave him the enemy that he just kept talking. And as he kept talking, they just kept the elbows up, and we're not going to become part of the United States. It gave them everything they needed.
Absolutely. It kept up the Trudeau-Trump dynamic was given legs. So again, a question in my mind is, how much could you even say the Liberals, they're not low-level political warfare players, did they play Trump in a way? I don't know. It's just endlessly fascinating stuff for me to think about.
Sticking on the CCP, you had written an article, and now it's from it's off of Dennis. I think is it Molinaro?
Dennis Molinaro, former Canadian,
talking about Pierre Trudeau being the first CCP influenced candidate. Why? I find that interesting. I guess. What was the argument that he was making, or what did you pull out of it that you're like, that is really interesting?
Yeah, no, tremendously interesting. And I would tell people, go to the Bureau and read it, to get everything. And furthermore, even more than that, get Molinaro's book, because he's got caveats and, statements around how he got his information, and which I'll explain, that give people his full argument. But what I took out of it, some of this I knew, some of it I didn't, but as a former Canadian national security professional and policy advisor and a historian, once he leaves government, I don't know when, over the past few years, I guess, he's done open source research that any of us could do if we had his capacities into Pierre Trudeau. So what I revealed in his first story, what I call his explosive scoop, is through archived documents and newly declassified RCMP security service records, Molinaro found out that there was a University of British Columbia student named Paul Lynn, who was born in Canada, traveled back to China, and somehow made connections with the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. And then the RCMP documents that Molinaro got and parsed through said that Canada's security said this guy, Paul Lynn, was sent back to Canada, tasked from the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party to interfere and influence elite Canadians towards Beijing's policy. And at this point, there is no Beijing, because, this is 1968 or the 60s. It's still the government of China, the national government of China, and the Chinese Communist Party are battling for control, right? And so to pick up, if you let me just ramble a bit, I'm going off memory here. Like Molinaro pulls documents, including Pierre Trudeau's own biography about how Trudeau in the 1960s or 1960 went over to China and got this fully curated tour of like the Chinese Communist Party and its institutions. And Trudeau, in his book, I think called Two Young Innocents in China, talks about how he was, shown libraries, including a library that just somehow happened to have Pierre Trudeau's low-level book on a Quebec mining dispute prominently displayed. Pierre Trudeau is shown like an institute on minorities where he's taken to a couple of pretty young, Tibetan, Korean women talking about how the Chinese Communist Party is so great. So in a nutshell, Trudeau is cultivated, he's curated, he is seduced by the highest levels of Chinese intelligence and diplomacy to support the view that the Chinese Communist Party should replace what has become the government of Taiwan as the single representative of China. Trudeau, as it turns out, Molinaro walks us through how Paul Lin, getting back to this UBC student, in all his travels and, around the world, and efforts to get to Trudeau, is at the same time, promoting the view that the government of Taiwan is illegitimate and the Chinese Communist Party should be the real China. And so in a nutshell, it gets very complex, but Trudeau in 1970 leads the world. I say it's not leads, it's shameful. He declares the Chinese Communist Party, the PRC, as the new head of China, and what follows is Taiwan is isolated. Taiwan can't. There's efforts by Trudeau to not let Taiwan come to the Montreal Olympics. All kinds of second, third order effects happen, but essentially, if you see where I'm going, this is the conflict of today that Washington is focused on. Beijing attempting to militarily take over Taiwan. And what Molinaro finds is this high-level Chinese Communist agent was sent to target Trudeau. And, carefully caveated, Molinaro states, from the day that Pierre Trudeau recognized the PRC, every Canadian, every institution, all elements of Canada have been a subject of Chinese interference. And so it all stems from Trudeau and Canada's knowledge that various intelligence documents said Ottawa was warned that this Paul Lin guy was said by some sources to be very close to Pierre Trudeau. So Molinaro, the historian, the former analyst, pieces it all together. And he doesn't conclusively say Pierre Trudeau recognized the PRC directly due to Paul Lin. He says RCMP, per the documents, were obviously worried that is what happened. And, look at what Trudeau did.
Well, the thing with Pierre that shocked me at one point in time, but I guess I don't know if it should have shocked me. It was just how friendly he was with some of the disruptors of the world back then. You just look at Cuba, you look at different factions of communist, socialist leanings, and he was traveling the world meeting with them. So to me, to hear that the Chinese were keying in or interested by Pierre, I guess this doesn't surprise me. But in saying that, I don't know if I'd ever heard anyone draw a connection to it.
The connections that Molinaro makes, like a lot of them just from academic level reading and open source, I had vague or good awareness in some areas, but I forgot that for me, the incredible bombshell that I had no idea of, and this will take it back to our prior discussion about Frank McKenna and Canadian elites, this guy, Paul Lin, this proven, documented, high-level Chinese agent and asset, started the Canada-China Business Council decades ago, right? And so I had no idea of this. I knew already that the Canada-China Business Council, through my work, brings in people like Dominic Barton, brings in the Desmarais family of Montreal, brings in these Canadian banks and all these extremely wealthy individuals and corporations in Canada that want deep trade with China. This Chinese agent, Paul Lin, had started it. And then Molinaro unpacks that to show the Canada-China Business Council was also, the entity of the Desmarais Power Corporation family. Molinaro makes, shows what I also knew, that Power Corporation and Desmarais, and therefore the Canada-China Business Council, had deep ties to Pierre Trudeau, Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien, Brian Mulroney, right? And so furthermore, I mean, the way Molinaro unpacks it is he says, with this information about Paul Lin and his efforts to influence elite individuals in Canada, the documents that Molinaro found also say that this Paul Lin guy was very instrumental in elite people in Canada seeking investment into China. This Paul Lin guy was a fixer. He enabled that to happen. He curated, access to the Chinese embassy, which pops up in Canada after Pierre Trudeau's recognition of Beijing. Paul Lin curated academic or journalist or American sort of access to the Chinese embassy. So this guy that I had no idea of, which surprised me since I've focused so much on China and Canada, appears to have been like an absolute elite fixer for China, giving powerful Canadian businessmen, North American businessmen, access to China. And so when I step back, the Canada-China Business Council, these networks involving the Desmarais, the Frank McKennas, the people that run Canada, the Dominic Bartons, the people that have a good say in who's going to run for Liberal Prime Minister, whether you're Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau, Jean Chrétien, these people appear to have a connection to an elite United Front work department creation or a Chinese intelligence creation of this guy, Paul Lin, who helped set up the Canada-China Business Council, which to me, I know I'm getting into the weeds there, but that as a China sort of influence expert by now, that was the bombshell that I had no idea that concrete connection was there.
One final one before I let you off. I'd heard about the lab in Winnipeg, and there had been some different reports on did the research there go all the way to the top of COVID, all the things of it. Your thoughts on Winnipeg, and once again, I can't even say their names. I'm like I'm like reading your headline, and I'm like, I can't even read the names. I'm not even going to try. But that they collaborated in a 2019 Wuhan bat filovirus research project that some Western intelligence, including the CIA, with varying degrees of confidence, assess having to likely cause the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd heard. Like, I've read and listened to different things on this. Now I see you talking about it. I'm like, interesting. What did you find in that story?
Yeah, so I've reported a lot on this because, as you know, Trudeau's government tried to block the Conservative opposition for getting access to documents which could shed light on why this husband and wife from China were booted out of the level 4 pathogen lab in Winnipeg. It was a big mystery. Various people, including myself, got some Freedom of Information documents as to why this Chinese Canadian Dr. Chu, a woman, Order of Canada, I believe, scientist, very, very well reputed worldwide. But there was a big mystery. Why was she booted out? And so the documents that eventually came out over the past year are redacted CSIS documents that essentially say that, and I reported on this, she could be connected, even though there's redactions, to this well-known Dr. Shi Shenli, who is the Wuhan Institute doctor that was doing all these, bat filovirus studies for decades and had, worked with some controversial American scientists. And so it came out that Dr. Chu, the Winnipeg Chinese Canadian scientist, had been secretly traveling to Wuhan, had been lying to the Canadian government and public health about where she's going, had been collaborating with Chinese bioweapon research programs, in various things, in this case on Ebola, collaborating with the highest levels of the Chinese military. So using Canada's Winnipeg lab capacity, in terms of with Ebola samples and other stuff that can kill the world. She was working on it in Winnipeg and sharing it with the highest levels of China's military intelligence. I had reported on that. I had connected her to Dr. Shi. But what's clear here is not only that, she's working along with Dr. Shi on the special project of the bat filovirus, that a special Chinese, let's just call it bioweapon research project in Wuhan, is started in early 2019. And Dr. Shi is one of 3 top scientists involved. This is all a secret. So these documents came out in Parliament that suggested she could be part of it somehow. But, it's important to note that Trudeau's government, when the Conservatives came out and said, hey, it looks like she might have been part of something very scary, bioweapon research, the Trudeau Liberals said that's racist. That's all been proven false. She was working on that. There's not direct evidence that anything for bat filoviruses came out of the Winnipeg lab, but there's direct access evidence that she was working on that project, and she was working on it secretly, and she was working on it while she was in Wuhan. Right? So that's that. Parcel that off. Did anything material come out of the Winnipeg lab? I don't have that evidence. There's tons of redactions, but I say it's enough that she was working on that project. Now, as you know, in the past year, the FBI, CIA, British intelligence, I believe German intelligence, US defense military intelligence have all come out basically publicly and said, they have various degrees of confidence that it's likely that a lab accident on a bat filovirus project in Wuhan caused COVID-19. So that's not conclusively proven in what's come out in credited reporting. I strongly believe that American intelligence knows more than they're saying. They could probably say it's quite likely they have proof that it did leak out of that Wuhan lab. But what Molinaro, I reported on a lot of this. Molinaro goes a little bit further with his skills and capacity, again, looking at open source documents. And he says, we need to ask if the lab leak theory is proven as conclusive, what does it say? That a Canadian scientist was one of 3 working on the project. And furthermore, the people that she was collaborating with, a company called Cansino Logics, which was a bunch of Chinese scientists, operating around the University of Toronto, which it turned out were part of the People's Liberation Army. Dr. Chu and others helped them with their COVID vaccine, right? And so it's all part of the same piece. Molinaro asks, okay, so if Dr. Chu and these other alleged Chinese spies in Canada were helping China with the vaccine, which we didn't get, they stiffed it on us, although we were working on it together, and she was part of something that caused the pandemic, not proven, but very strong, questions to be raised. Molinaro.
Yeah, I feel like I could just hear Cojones talking right now, right? If you're an American sitting there looking at Canada's role in it, the connections, the ties are all sitting there. You can't, you mentioned all the redactions. You can't fully understand everything because of redactions, but you can start to piece it together, and it sounds an awful lot like a Canadian played a major role in developing what would turn out to be the virus that shut the world down.
There's that strong possibility. Yeah. And I think you're right. It gets back to what you and I and Cojones were talking about. Canada as a weakness or used as a node for China's clandestine activities, whether it's financial organized crime, fentanyl, political interference, or using a pathogen lab. And I already had, a former Trump senior investigator named David Asher did tell me on the record, and I've reported this, obviously he was holding back a lot, but he said, yeah, it's fair to say that in Washington, we had a concern. The Winnipeg lab was a strong part of China's bioweapon research program. So that says it all, right? Look, any country will be attacked and infiltrated. There's so many FBI cases looking into similar attempted operations in the United States. The difference is there's FBI investigations and prosecutions.
Yes.
And there literally is not in Canada. There is not.
Here it's racist to talk about it.
It's racist, and it just happens until the Americans say, hey, you got to do something about it, which brings me back to fentanyl. You can't deny all these patterns with the U.S. being concerned, Canada doing nothing.
Yeah, I appreciate you hopping on and doing this, Sam. We'll keep tabs on once again, you mentioned off the hop, you got 30,000 people on Substack. If people are searching you out, where would you point them to? I assume Substack, but where would you point people to find your work?
Yeah, so I have my URL, thebureau.news. So you can just, probably the best way, search The Bureau, Sam Cooper, in your Google there, or in your AI, and they'll take you to thebureau.news, which is platformed on Substack. And I'll add, look, I could have just made my own website, but being with Substack, I can now say they recognize me as a bestseller in journalism. They're giving support. And I think that's a great, going back to what we talked about, I believe Substack is an extremely important new company for independent voices, independent journalists, independent commentators. So for me, I'm giving them a lot of credit for that.
Well, and I think, don't quote me on this because I'll have somebody text me different, but one of the things I admired about Substack, the reason I'm on Substack, is during the height of COVID and, some insane times, they were one of the few that didn't deplatform people for talking about things. Somebody could maybe prove me wrong on that, but I remember, like X, when they were removing everyone, Patreon started removing a bunch of people, on and on and on. And the stories went, and you can point to almost every social media. The Substack was one of the few that didn't. And so I think, that to me was something that was attracted me there. Cause YouTube, I started on YouTube, and then the Freedom Convoy happened, and my channel just disappeared overnight. It's like, holy crap. So when you come back to all these different bills and they can just make you disappear, I've felt the full force of that on one of the places, YouTube, right? And another one that was wonderful through the times of COVID, although they put warnings on every show I had, was Spotify. Spotify would say, COVID misinformation, or however they had that little warning about the show. But they never, ever removed any specific show on there. And I got a ton of time for that. And that doesn't mean the Canadian government isn't going to try and find ways to push on these social media platforms to not remove different people. We've certainly seen it happen to a lot of people. So when you talk Substack, I have a ton of time for it.
Yeah, and what you just said there, I think it's good to hammer on it again. Independent media and voices. This is just getting back to what humanity has always been about. People are dumb. Yeah, some people go off the crank on the left and right side and say wrong things, but let's give some people, some credit for sifting information themselves. And I think even in the space you and I operate, that independent platform voice, people have learned, look, don't just trust me. Don't just trust Sean. Get your receipts, do your own information, get a little bit more curious yourself and take it as a perspective among others. And I think the space is getting more educated and mature in that way, which is good.
Yeah. The word that came to mind for me is rich. Like there's people are getting educated. It's becoming a very deep conversation, which I'm all here for. Sam, appreciate you hopping on and giving me some time this morning.